Right, so time travel gives rise to all sorts of paradoxes.
Do you believe in time travel? For many years, humans have been trying to figure out how to bend the fabrics of space and time, traveling forward into the future or back to the past. Scientists like Stephen Hawking, Nikola Tesla, and Albert Einstein believed this technology would emerge in the near future. But what if it already exists, hidden away from the rest of the world? This is the true story of a time traveler who witnessed an experiment the government has been trying to bury for decades. To fully understand this epic tale, we must travel to a time before our hero was even born. The genesis of the machine. The story began during the heat of World War II. The United States of America was not as powerful as it is today, so based on military power and capability, it wasn't really prepared for a global conflict. Germany, on the other hand, was in possession of powerful and advanced weapons. By 1942, Nazi forces had taken control of almost all of Europe, North Africa, and huge parts of Russia. The US Army, Britain, and other member nations of the Allies found themselves on the losing side. However, the United States had a secret weapon at their disposal. The only problem was that they didn't know how to use it just yet. You see, earlier in World War I, Nikola Tesla worked with the United States Army on developing remote control technology and ways to destroy enemy forces from a distance. It was this mission that gave birth to Tesla's death ray. Unfortunately, it never worked. At least that's according to the official version of the story. While the war was going on, the United States was looking for a way out, desperate to gain an advantage over the enemy troops. This is where the idea of the machine came in. You see, Tesla had patented the technology to produce electromagnetic weapons, including one capable of making things invisible. Then, in 1919, Albert Einstein proved that light could be bent by gravity. Morphing these two ideas together, the United States launched Project Rainbow.
Aimed at me.
That tends to happen when you make radical claims such as gravity bends light.
The idea was for scientists to design a device that could make ships invisible to both radars and even the naked eye. To the people who were in charge of the project, it looked achievable. The only thing they had to do was create a powerful electromagnetic field to warp space-time around the ship. After years of development, a prototype was completed and installed on the USS Eldridge.
The original idea that the Navy had was to actually make the ship radar invisible.
By July 1943, America was ready for the first test. Dr. John von Neumann, a scientist working with the Navy, was in charge of operating the equipment. For this mission, he chose two Navy engineers, Edward and Duncan Cameron. On this fateful day, these two brothers both manned their stations in the engine room waiting for a call. As soon as the call came in, they switched on the machine, and the testing began. Within a few seconds, the ship resonated with a deep humming sound. Suddenly, a glowing green fog started to appear around the ship. People watching from the dock and nearby ships could not believe what they saw, and in the blink of an eye, the Eldridge disappeared. However, that wasn't the end of the experiment, because moments later, the ship mysteriously reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away from where it vanished. The strangest part, though, was that it appeared 10 minutes before the experiment began, which meant that they successfully traveled back in time. 20 minutes later, the Eldridge reappeared in Philadelphia. On the outside, it looked like the mission was accomplished. However, something had gone terribly wrong, and only the people inside the ship knew what was going on. The jump through time. After the Eldridge reappeared in Philadelphia, the sailors on the other ships rejoiced. They all thought the experiment was a success. However, it wasn't. To the men aboard, it was a nightmare. There was chaos on the ship, so horrible they couldn't describe it. Men were found holding on to parts of the ship, fighting for dear life, screaming and shouting in agony. Ed Cameron and Duncan, his brother, both survived the experiment. However, other crew members did not. Some suffered severe burns on their bodies. Others were plagued by radiation sickness. A number of them went totally insane due to the unnatural event they just went through. Some men were nowhere to be found. But despite the disaster that followed this experiment, the US Navy saw potential in the project. So they seek advice from their top scientific consultant, Albert Einstein. Fast forward to October 28, 1999.
They claim Albert Einstein and other scientists designed a way to make a ship vanish into thin air, literally.
A lot of repairs and upgrades had been done to the machine. Many parts had been upgraded, and to an extent, the scientists now understood the principles of time travel better. It was time for another Philadelphia experiment. Once again, Ed and Duncan Cameron took their position on the ship. The call came in from the bridge as usual, and it was time to go. Ed turned the machine on, and it spun to life with a familiar low humming sound. The Cameron brothers were nervous this time. After some seconds, there was an explosion. The machine began shaking loose, and fires were breaking out everywhere. Ed and Duncan raced toward the top side of the ship and saw the same familiar bright green vortex from the first experiment hovering over the ship. Trying to save themselves, they jumped over the rail, expecting to land in the water in the Philadelphia shipyard. Instead, they fell through the bright green light and found themselves on dry land. They were still covered in light, but now the light was coming from a helicopter as well as a Jeep's headlamp. Suddenly, two military policemen pulled Ed and Duncan to their feet and drove them to a nearby building. They accompanied them down to a long hallway and through an elevator to meet someone whose face seemed familiar. At first, they struggled to recognize him, but then it clicked. This was Dr. John von Neumann, the physicist in charge of the experiment. But now he looked old, very old actually. Seeing the confusion written all over their faces, von Neumann addressed them, saying, "Welcome to 1983, boys." The Cameron brothers looked at each other, even more confused. Did he just say 1983? That could not be true. They had just escaped from a burning ship moments ago, and the year was 1943. Could they have traveled a whole 4 decades into the future? Ed and Duncan thought they were jumping to safety when they jumped overboard. What they didn't realize was that they would be jumping through time, changing the history of science and technology forever. The Monto Chair. Ed and Duncan Cameron were led into an underground facility far beneath the Montauk Air Force Station on Long Island. Officially, it was a decommissioned radar station, but in reality, this was the headquarters of the Montauk Project, which was now being used as a continuation and escalation of the experiment that previously took place in Philadelphia. And just like that time experiment, the Montauk Project could manipulate the dimensions of space and time into a unified framework. However, contrary to when the experiment began, the manipulation could now be controlled by psychics and alien technology. Central to the experiments was the Monto Chair. This chair used computers to generate electromagnetic fields that interacted with human brainwaves. In addition, Nikola Tesla's theories on resonance and energy played a role in the design of this chair. But this chair was way beyond ordinary, as the technology that connected the human mind to the machine was reverse-engineered from unidentified flying objects. You see, many of these recovered UFOs had no physical controls. They were operated by the mind of the pilot, so the Monto Chair intensifies psychic abilities, allowing subjects to manifest objects, see distant locations, and travel through time. From this moment on, both Ed and Duncan became the official subjects of this strange project. Because Duncan was naturally talented, his abilities made him the center of interest in the experiment. During one intense session, his eyes rolled back, his voice became unnaturally deep, and he said he could see other worlds and parallel dimensions. He claimed that the multiverse was real, and that everything scientists believed about the universe was only a tiny part of what really is. On the other hand, Edward was not skilled enough yet to use the Monto Chair, but he could still use it to travel through time. On one occasion, Ed and Duncan traveled together to the year 2137, but they did not like what they found. The future foretold. Traveling through time had become a common experience for the Cameron brothers at this point, but during their trip to the year 2013-77, they encountered something that chilled them to the bones. As soon as they landed, Ed and Duncan found themselves in a wasteland. In the distance, they saw cities and places that had been totally destroyed. Even though there were people present, nobody wanted to have anything to do with them. The few who did told horrible stories of war and disaster. Sometimes in the late 2020s, a nuclear war broke out between the West, Russia, and China. Every big city on Earth was destroyed, and most small cities too. Governments were gone, and people became tribal again. The war caused a huge climate catastrophe that put the coastlines underwater. Unfortunately, only about 100 million people survived. Despite the desolation, people were still moving technology forward. They still innovated. Everyone was building weapons, and most diseases had been cured. After this encounter, Duncan and Ed decided to travel even further into the future and check out what was going on. They traveled 300 more years forward to 2079. To their surprise, everything was very different here. It was described as a utopia. Society had rebuilt itself in harmony with technology and nature. Buildings floated in the air using anti-gravity technology. The energy was so clean and endless, pulled from the quantum vacuum. There was no pollution, and the government didn't exist. Instead, the world was being ruled by artificial intelligence. People lived in peace and wanted for nothing. Money was no longer necessary. Technology provided food, education, entertainment, and anything else they needed. Education and personal development were prioritized. People spent their lives learning and exploring their interests, free from the burdens of labor and survival. This was a world where humanity had not just survived, but also thrived. This was paradise. Because of this experience, Ed and Duncan started reconsidering their decision to come back. Staying here would mean they could finally be free of the infamous Montauk Project and the Monto Chair. So, defying their orders, they decided not to go back. But then, something strange happened. Exploring the planets. Ed opened his eyes and checked his watch. There he discovered that he and Duncan had lived in the future for 2 years. However, it was as though no time had passed. This was a superpower. They could travel through time, anytime, and anywhere around the world. It was then that Ed heard Duncan's voice in his mind, revealing that not only could they travel around Earth, but they could also explore the galaxies. All of a sudden, a flash of light transported them to another planet. It was desolate and didn't look like a full day or night. The sky looked spooky with a purple coloration. To put it simply, it was practically a dried and barren plain land. Ed was curious why Duncan brought them to such a harsh place. In response, Duncan said this planet is home to the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. He described the inhabitants as tall, slim beings with long limbs and large, oval-shaped eyes. On this planet, their means of communication are different. They had the ability to read minds and communicate without using words or other physical signals. They had mastered teleportation. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level. They were almost immortal. But before they could fully take in this experience, Duncan closed his eyes again and took them to another planet. This time, they found themselves in a lush jungle. Judging by the sound they heard, this planet was brimming with life. And Duncan said it was then transmitted an image into Ed's mind, a huge city built into the jungle landscape. Ed asked who lived there. Duncan motioned to the jungle behind him and showed his brother 2 reptilian creatures watching them from the jungle. Unfortunately, these brothers just broke the golden rule of interdimensional space exploration: never travel to the planet of lizards. It was obvious that these beings didn't look friendly, and the brothers knew they had to get out of there. However, while trying to break away from this consciousness, Duncan fell to his knees like he was not feeling too well. Ed helped him up and immediately knew they needed to get back to Montauk. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, disconnected himself from his chair, and rushed down the hall. He burst into Duncan's room, where he found his brother looking terrible, panting and sweating. His skin had become pale, and it looked like he was dying. It was at that moment that Dr. von Neumann walked in next. He explained to him about the unforeseen circumstances currently happening to his brother. Every time he jumps through time, he gets worse, and each jump spins off a new timeline. Because of this, he had created paradoxes the scientists didn't foresee, and by consequence, damaged the fabric of space and time itself. It all started back in 1943 during the Philadelphia experiment. According to Neumann, the only way to reverse this situation was for the two brothers to go back to the Eldridge and destroy the machine before it could be activated. By doing so, the timeline would be repaired and Duncan would be okay. However, there was a little problem with this plan. According to Neumann, once the brothers reached the Eldridge, their consciousness would be transferred to the brain of an infant in the late 1920s, before the experiment was even conceived. The name of your host would be called Al-Bielek. All their memories would be wiped out, and your host would not be aware that the Cameron brothers ever existed. This was to preserve the knowledge the two men had acquired. However, if they were ever needed in the future, the agency would know where to find them. After the successful transfer of their consciousness to the infant, they all will be entirely wiped out by a monster from another planet. Taking this as their final mission, the men traveled back in time and destroyed the ship generators with axes. At that moment, the rips in time began to mend, and things returned back to normal. The Eldridge took a trip back in time to 1943, but then something strange happened that changed everything. The return of Edward. Between the 1970s and 80s, Al-Bielek worked as an electrical engineer. He was an exceptional man, and his co-workers referred to him as thoughtful and intelligent. However, he also had a fascination with fringe science. In the year 1985, Al went to Montauk, New York, to hear Preston Nichols give a presentation about how he used electromagnetic waves for various applications, from healing to intensifying psychic power. Pushed by curiosity, Al's goal was to learn more about his psychic research. As Nichols walked on stage, he introduced his assistant to the audience, and you won't believe who it was. Right there in the flesh was Duncan Cameron. Al had never set his eyes on Duncan before, but he swore he knew him. After the presentation, Al walked up to him and introduced himself. They both talked for about 2.5 hours. While talking, both Al and Duncan got this strange feeling that they couldn't explain. Preston, knowing what was going on, smiled, called them, and asked them to follow him because he wanted to show them something. A few miles east was an abandoned military base, the old Montauk Air Force Station. Preston claimed they might find answers there. While inside, the men explored the empty buildings all day. During this time, Al couldn't shake the strange feeling that he had been there before. Over the next couple of years, Al's memories of the Montauk Project began to come back. It was Preston Nichols who would later inform him how he was brainwashed, while stating that the same thing had happened to him as well. According to Nichols, he had lived 2 lives simultaneously. In one, he was an electrical engineer, while in the other, he was the director of the Montauk Project. Al-Bielek, on the other hand, was brainwashed the same way. And now that his memories were returning, his recurring dream started to make sense. In the dream, Al's name was Edward Cameron. He worked with his brother Duncan on a ship. But then, an accident occurred. The men jumped overboard, and then Al woke up. Despite these new revelations, Al continued living a normal life until one late night in 1988, when everything fell into place. Al, now retired and watching TV, saw an HBO announcement that the next feature of the evening would be the Philadelphia experiment. Then it started to trigger memories. First, it was the Phoenix Project. Then 98-8, when he saw the movie for the first time.
The Philadelphia experiment is a series of secret military projects.
The realization hit him like a bomb, and he started to remember the Philadelphia experiment. Because of the movie, Al's lost memories of the Philadelphia experiment came flooding back in. Over the next 2 years, Al-Bielek recalled all of Edward Cameron's memories and the whole truth about the project. It turns out the Montauk Project was a black ops government program to create psychological weapons. Thousands of people were used in experiments against their will. Most were boys between the ages of 10 and 15 years old. Some of these children remember the experiments. They are known as the Montauk Boys. Because of this gained memory, in the year 1990, Al-Bielek started giving lectures nationwide. His mission was to expose the government cover-up of the Montauk Project. He wanted the public to know about human rights violations, missing children, and about the abuse. According to Al-Bielek and Preston Nichols, the Montauk Project focused on mind control, time travel, interdimensional travel, and psychics. The US government denies these claims as ridiculous. But are they really? Did the US government research time travel and interdimensional travel? no one can really say for sure. You see, the time travel storyline was not part of the legend of the Philadelphia experiment until the movie was released. Al's story contains a lot of details from the movie, and his story has changed over time.
The United States was up to relating to time travel.
Originally, he jumped from 1943 to 1983, but over the years, he added 2137, 2043, 2749, 3543, and all kinds of other dates. Sometimes Duncan stays behind at a certain time. Sometimes Al stays behind and works as a tour guide in the future with anti-gravity and floating cities. But the big question is time travel even possible? Beck Revelation. The best way to answer this question is to scrutinize Al Bielek's story. You see, when challenged, Al's story is quite flexible. First, he claimed he was discovering new memories that were erased from him a long time ago. The Edward Cameron backstory resurfaced as well, but the problem was, Ed Cameron never existed. On Al's website, you will find a picture of Edward Cameron, except it's not real. It was really a Princeton yearbook photo of Cameron Alexander, Cameron 3. He also claimed the picture is Edward Cameron from a different timeline, but how true is that claim? Al has used other photos that were proven to be fake in the past, so the credibility of his story is up for question. In addition, Al also claimed that John von Neumann ran the project. The truth is, von Neumann was truly a real scientist. However, he died in 1957, so how could he have been in Montauk in 1983? To explain this, Al claimed that he faked his death for his personal protection, but according to official records, the real Neumann died of cancer sometime in the year 1957. Apparently, they gave him a new identity while he remained on the project. It is also believed that he was the director of the Phoenix Project until 1977, where he became a consultant because he developed a split personality. Al also claimed that the Office of Naval Research was involved in the Philadelphia experiment, which happened in the year 1943. However, the agency was not created until 1946. The truth is, there's plenty of evidence that Al Bielek made the whole thing up. But when backed into a corner, he used the different timeline trope as a crutch.
The things we would like to understand about time travel are: 1.
Al first said that the nuclear war happened in the year 2000, but he was wrong, because nothing of that nature happened that year. He then mentioned 2005 and then 2015. Sadly, Al Bielek passed away in the year 2011, so we don't have an update on when the nuclear war will actually start. While Al Bielek was gaining fame telling his story, other people also began imitating his story, claiming that the same thing happened to them. To make it believable, they would add new details. Al would then incorporate those details into his own story. That's how the Montauk Project eventually became part of Al's story. Al Bielek never provided any physical evidence or any information that could be confirmed. We do know that he was always a little paranoid and into conspiracies. One time, a former co-worker was asked if he believed the story. In response, he revealed that Al was a nice person and very intelligent, although he wasn't surprised to hear the story.
Disappear and to continue across the time stream uncontrolled.
Although he found his story pretty hard to believe, it sure seems like a logical progression for Al, he said. But from what the co-worker recalled, Al was always talking about underground bases and government cover-ups, yet one story after another about secret research, UFOs, extraterrestrials, you name it. Other co-workers also confirmed this story, but none of them really believed it was true. Whether it is true or not, these stories spark our imaginations. It keeps us interested in concepts like time travel, psychic phenomena, alternate realities, and other mysteries of the universe. Maybe someday, we will finally unlock the true mystery of this phenomenon. The science of time travel. The science of time travel is a difficult one. Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity postulates that time is relative to the perspective of the observer. A person moving close to the speed of light will age and become bored far more slowly than a person standing still. Einstein's general theory of relativity states that the stronger the local gravity, the slower the passage of time. According to Drexel University cosmologist Dave Goldberg, near massive bodies near the surface of neutron stars, or even at the surface of the Earth, although it's a tiny effect, time runs slower than it does far away. Some scientists have proposed theories for time travel that incorporate a wormhole or a cosmic tube connecting two distant locations. It's like a fast track to the stars. Picture sending the opposite end of the wormhole back to its origin at a speed close to that of light. There is a disconnection between those two halves. Both take place at different times and places.
In a way, every man, woman, and child on this earth is a time traveler.
Time travel occurs when you traverse the space between them. Moving one end of the wormhole near a massive gravitational field, like a black hole, while maintaining the other end near a weaker gravitational force, would achieve a similar effect. The possibility of time travel. The question of whether time travel is feasible has been around ever since the publication of H.G. Wells' novel, The Time Machine. By definition, travel is the hypothetical activity of traveling into the past or future. Generally, time travel is a widely recognized concept in philosophy and fiction, particularly science fiction. In fiction, it is typically achieved through the use of a hypothetical device known as the time machine. Some people believe that time travel is possible in the future, while others dismiss such ideas as science fiction. Not everyone who believes in time travel is a conspiracy theorist, though.
Humans don't perceive these minuscule time differences, but are very fast as clocks.
Some, like the late Stephen Hawking, entertained the hope that humans would develop time travel technology one day. In the movies, time travelers typically step inside a machine and poof, they disappear into thin air. They then reappear instantaneously among cowboys, knights, or dinosaurs. Scientists don't think this concept is likely in the real world, but they also didn't dispute the fact about traveling through time. Although Al's story is well documented, it remains but a tale of another zealous theorist with no evidence to back up his assertions. While he's dead and gone now, believers in his theory keep holding on to hope that he was just transported to an alternate universe. Maybe someday soon, the truth will finally be revealed. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.